Well, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to come here today and discuss leadership with you. The room is so full of stars of rank. I'm reminded of General Eisenhower in 1944 saying that if the Germans had bombed his last conference before the Normandy invasion, there would have been more stars thrown into the sky than there were stars in the heavens that we've just heard about. Of course, Italy is where the very idea of leadership in war was minted and codified by the Caesars. The Roman army was the first military system to organize into legions, cohorts, and centuries that we today would equate with divisions, battalions, and companies. The military formation known as the Century of 100 Legionaries unknowingly followed a principle of modern psychology. In the 1990s, Professor Robin Dunbar proved that the average human moved in a group of 100 to 150 people that they knew, recognized, and interacted with. Thus, Roman soldiers, as those in today's NATO infantry companies, practiced Dunbar's number. It's actually 148, in knowing their comrades in their company, plus a battalion hierarchy of maybe 150 people. Timeless. Leadership in war is reflected in much military terminology, which emerged over the years from Italy. The capitanus, the chief, which gives us the rank of captain, merged into the 16th century with the word colonna, the column, at whose head the colonel marched. The wars of the 17th century brought us the grouping of those columns into brigadas, whom were commanded by a brigadier, and so on. 2,000 years later, the red colour of the capes and tunics of the legates and the tribunes is reflected in the red worn on the rank and the collars of general officers in some armies today. The technology and the uniforms change, but the people do not. As leaders, we are all motivated by the same hopes and fears as those fighting at Cannae in 216 BC, on the bridge with Napoleon at Arcola in 1796, at the battle which led directly to the founding of the ICRC, the International Committee for the Red Cross, Solferino in 1859, by those slogging away in the 12 battles of the Isonzo in the First World War or during the Second World War. And that is the value that military history brings to the profession of arms, that we use the past to cast a glimmer of light onto our behaviour as leaders in the future. And we've just heard how we will need it going to Mars and the Moon. 10 years ago, I wrote a study of two field marshals well known to all of you, who both fought in Italy, Rommel in the Piave in 1917 and Montgomery in 1943. And I was struck by the many parallels in their lives. Apart from the obvious fact that both reached 5-star rank and fought in the May 1940 campaign in France and against each other in North Africa and later in Normandy, both were born in November, 2 days apart. Erwin Rommel, as you can see, on the 15th, Bernard Montgomery on the 17th, but separated by 4 years. The pair featured on magazine covers and on picture postcards, and both were the subject of a personality cult in their lifetimes, because they had a considerable publicity machine working for them. Both would consider themselves outsiders, socially and geographically. Neither were born into a family of military tradition. They joined their armies as professionals before World War I, Montgomery in 1908 and Erwin Rommel 4 years later. They were both badly wounded and decorated for bravery during the 1914-18 war, and wrote books and training pamphlets during the interwar period. And both was lucky enough to be actively mentored by a senior officer. Well, I could go on, but my subject is military leadership, not a biographical sketch of two commanders already well known to you. I'm now going to ask you all in the room, how many of you have been led by a good leader? Yes? Am I getting a lot of nodding heads or hands? However, if I reverse the question, how many of you have been led by a poor leader? I get a quicker, more decisive reaction. And that gives us an interesting question, an interesting situation, because it's easier to define or understand leadership by what it isn't than by what it is. And I think we all feel that in this room and elsewhere. Well, my late friend, colleague, mentor, and one-time head of the British Reserve Forces, Brigadier Professor Richard Holmes, once identified the 10 diseases of leadership. As well as being my professor when I lectured under him at the United Kingdom Defence Academy for many years, in uniform I was his ADC. And the Brigadier and I conducted over 100 staff rides for NATO and other armies across Europe, dipping into many periods of history, from the Trojan Wars and the Romans through the medieval period to the wars of Napoleon and the two world wars. And more recently, I served with Italian forces in I-42 and S-41 in Bosnia, and later on in Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, Richard Holmes and I had many conversations about the common bad behaviours of leadership, of leaders through time. And what I propose to do in the next few minutes is just have a look at these 10 diseases in terms of Field Marshals Rommel and Montgomery. Leadership disease number 1 is the lack of moral courage, where leaders fail to do the right thing even when they know they should. And we've all seen this at work with politicians, with business leaders, and military commanders at every level. On the 17th of May 1940, Rommel wrote of capturing a French lieutenant colonel whose eyes glowed with hate and fury, and he was told to get on Rommel's tank. But he refused to come, said Rommel. So after summoning him 3 times to get in, there was nothing for it but to shoot him. It may surprise you, but here Rommel had personally ordered and witnessed a war crime. He spoke out against such behaviour all his life, but time was short in the 1940 campaign. He felt he was in a hurry and the need to set an example to his own men, so he chose the most convenient but wrong path. This has nothing to do with physical courage, but we've all seen examples of a senior or a superior shrink and take the easiest option. On the 7th of January 1945, Montgomery held a press conference claiming credit for winning the Battle of the Bulge, the Ardennes offensive, which was then in its closing stages. He was factually and morally wrong to do this. He lacked the moral courage to applaud his transatlantic allies, the Americans, for success in their defense of the Bulge. And his behavior caused such controversy that the Yanks never forgave him. Well, the second leadership disease is a failure to recognize that opposition can be loyal. In his headquarters, Montgomery surrounded himself with a staff of young officers who were not encouraged to challenge his views. This happened in the planning before all the major operations. Once Monty's mind was made up, people were reluctant to share their concerns or offer ideas for improvement because they were likely to be fired or posted for speaking out and speaking their mind. Now, it has to be said, Rommel, too, frequently tended to fire staff officers with whom he disagreed. Now, challenge from subordinates is really important, as we know, while recognizing it takes a significant amount of moral courage to challenge your chief. If debate is encouraged, it promotes a culture of healthy discussion. After all, another important leader, General George Patton, once observed, if we are all thinking the same, someone is not thinking. Loyal dissent is actually incredibly valuable. Leadership disease number 3, which is connected with number 2 and is what I call consent and evade. Evade the responsibilities and consequences. And I wonder, I know this is a military gathering, but I wonder about my country and Brexit at the moment. We're evading responsibilities and consequences for the future that we cannot see. And this is really what this is about. It's when subordinates openly agree with the plan, but are secretly unconvinced and then fail to support it. And this breeds a lack of unity and loyalty throughout the headquarters. For D-Day, the 6th of June 1944, Montgomery ordered that the French city of Caen be seized by the British 3rd Division in the first 24 hours. Yet he did not provide enough troops for this. It was at least a 2-division task, and as was proved, impossible to achieve with too few men. Most subordinates at the time wrote privately of their concerns that the plan would not work, but no one, not one of his army, his corps, his division or brigade commanders challenged General Montgomery. They consented to it, but assuming it would fail, did not support the operation as Montgomery ordered, and Caen was not captured for 6 weeks. Now, at the same time, Rommel is appealing to Hitler for more panzer divisions to be stationed closer to the French coast. His rivals, von Rundstedt, Guderian, and others, disagreed. To this, Hitler ordered some tanks be kept in reserve, he gave some to Rommel, and he gave some to Rundstedt. And then he insisted that none could move without his authorization at all. And in this way, Hitler too consented to everybody, but evaded the operational results of his decisions, and then blamed his commanders. Leadership disease number 4 is the phrase, "You don't need to know this." Now, I'm not talking about OPSEC, operational security, but a recognition that information is power. Some leaders will try and reinforce their position by holding on to information unnecessarily. This reduces the ability for their subordinates to act on their own initiative, and that's what mission command is, because they lack the wider situational context. Both Monty and Rommel tended to do this. In the 8th Army, Rommel tightly controlled access to information in order to ensure his subordinates did exactly as they were told. Rommel was part of a machine that used information in a bizarre way. The Third Reich was a series of highly competitive organizations that rivaled and hated each other. There were several intelligence agencies, but none shared information in order to gain the upper hand. And furthermore, in the Wehrmacht's staff hierarchy, Intel or J2 was seen as subordinate to J3, and if it possessed unwelcome news, J2 was seen as defeatist. Well, leadership disease number 5 is summed up by the phrase, "I've made up my mind." These are the leaders who lack flexibility and often under stress are determined to drive through their plan regardless of new information or a change in circumstances. Now, whilst Rommel is regarded as a flexible leader at the tactical level, Montgomery generally is not. In the later stages of the Battle of El Alamein, elements of Montgomery's 8th Army broke through the German defenses and on the 4th of November 1942 began their pursuit. It was careful but slow, as Montgomery had intended, despite the fact that the Allies had air superiority, that Rommel was short of fuel, and a violent rainstorm burst over the region, bogging down the German vehicles in the desert mud and those of the Italians also. But Rommel got away because Montgomery would not take advantage of the Germans and Italians' predicament and allowed the Africa Corps to escape. And this was because Montgomery would not change his plan to the tactical situation. Well, leadership disease number 6 is looking for the perfect solution. This is where leaders delay making decisions because they wait for more information, which might never arrive. Sometimes it's described as analysis paralysis. This is the inability to make decisions, meaning subordinates cannot act. Rommel, commanding Army Group B, covering northern France in 1944, was waiting to repel the Allied invasion. He didn't know when, and he didn't know where it would come. Now, popular history suggests that he suspected Normandy and Hitler thought Calais. But the reality is that neither knew. And if you look at his papers, Rommel's mind changed every day because he was waiting for more and better information. This confused his 2 army commanders of the 7th and the 15th Armies, who were constantly having to shift their troops and units, which meant that no real training had taken place when the Allies landed on the 6th of June 1944, D-Day in Normandy. Rommel was decisive at the tactical level, but indecisive and much less effective at the operational level. Today, the US Marine Corps practice the 2/3 solution. Implement your plan when you have what you consider 2/3 of the picture. This recognizes that it will take too long to gain the remaining third, by which time you will have surrendered the initiative. Both our leaders suffered from leadership disease number 7, which is equating the quality of advice with someone's position or their background. Now, wisdom and insight are not necessarily reflected to uniform or status. Sometimes the least experienced person or sometimes someone outside the team can offer the freshest perspective to a problem. Montgomery loathed anyone who had served in the British Indian Army, in which he himself had once served. They looked down on him as a social inferior, and he thought them lazy and more interested in cocktails and playing polo. Consequently, he rejected their talent and their wisdom and posted their officers away. Now, fortunately, most were sent to fight with the 14th Army in Burma, where under Field Marshal Slim, they fought and beat the Japanese. The same thing happened in the Third Reich, where uniformed Nazis and the SS were generally deferred to more than army officers. Time and time again, political loyalty was judged more valuable than military wisdom, with, as we know, disastrous results. So in our headquarters, whose judgment do we value? The colonels or the captains? The civilian or the soldier? Well, the 8th leadership disease is defined by the phrase, "I'm too busy," where leaders are so focused on executing the current plan or routine business that they fail to identify and exploit opportunities that might increase their chances of success. This is often the fault of a leader stuck in his command post, unable to look for better ways or opportunities to succeed faster or more efficiently. The Germans have a name for being in touch with the front, which some of you may know, Fingerspitzengefühl, which means fingertip touch, at which Rommel excelled. Now, Montgomery, too, understood the value of situational awareness, and he initiated the system we all now use of a tactical, a main, and a rear headquarters geographically separate. He operated from TAC, the tactical headquarters, with a tiny staff and his liaison officers, who were his eyes and ears, with total authority and dedicated communication networks, and this was called the Phantom GHQ Liaison Regiment. Well, leadership disease number 9, you can see we're almost there now, is I can do your job better than you can. Where leaders do the opposite of number 8, the last one, and appear at the front, and we've all seen it, they start to micromanage their subordinates. Essentially, those at fault are returning to their comfort zone, often where they started their career as a company, battery, or squadron officer, or a battalion commander, perhaps, assuming they can lead better than the person now in that role. Rommel was particularly at fault here in North Africa, and his contemporaries often complained he was behaving like the young company commander he'd been on the 24th to the 26th of October 1917 when he won the Pour le Mérite on the River Piave. In this textbook, which he wrote in the 1930s, which is translated as Infantry Attacks, is all about those moments and how he commanded in the First World War. In other words, as a company commander, and that's really how he came to fame in the interwar period. If we look at this slide, you can see Rommel in 1940. He's just been awarded the Ritterkreuz, the Nazi cross around his neck. But look which of the two neck orders he's wearing on top. Although he's part of the Third Reich, he's put his First World War medal over the top, and that tells us which he thinks is more important and where he is in his mind. And generally, we can say often he's really thinking at the tactical level because he's always reaching back to where he felt most comfortable. Well, Montgomery, too, understood that mentoring, coaching, and developing people, bringing them into his headquarters for a while, was a better way to grow talent. And we can say that Rommel had an appalling personal command style. He drove everywhere to meetings to see people exposed to risk. And that is how he was caught and almost killed when his staff car was destroyed in an air attack in Normandy on the 17th of July 1944, driving between meetings. Montgomery did the opposite. You will come to him, to his tactical headquarters to see him. Well, our last leadership disease, number 10, is best summed up as big man, cold shadow. And this is where a commander might appear successful to the outside world, but is actually responsible for creating a negative climate within their headquarters. We've all seen this. The moment you enter a headquarters or a command post, you can sense the mood, a happy staff clustered around their commander, or those who fear him or her. And I was very pleased to enter such a happy atmosphere when I came here just after lunch this afternoon. Rommel and Montgomery both worked hard at their PR image, with the result that they were generally lionized by their troops under them. And in today's terms, we might call both of them Instagram junkies. But their contemporaries of equal rank or near rank found them impossible to work with, both of them. They were focused on their image, guided by prejudice sometimes, and certainly in Montgomery's case, an anti-American prejudice, and unwilling to share glory with the teams they led. The Frenchman Charles de Gaulle, we've mentioned him earlier, Mark Clark here in Italy, or Douglas MacArthur in the Pacific, are other examples of this. But by contrast, General Sir Harold Alexander commanding here in Italy, or Winston Churchill, both enjoyed debate, had genuine interest in those around them and openness to new ideas. And generally, they were surrounded by much happier environments. Perhaps I'm being over harsh on Montgomery. He did enjoy the company of challenging young staff officers. But that was tempered by the fact that those near him in age or rank certainly found him heavy going. Well, the two marshals died at different times. One a victim of Hitler, as we've heard, the other of old age, but their reputations live on, partly because of the publicity they received in their lifetimes. Both were great battle captains, but in different ways. Well, there we are, 10 diseases, plagues, if you like, of leadership. And I've looked at them largely through the careers of these two field marshals. But don't worry, these leadership diseases are not infectious. They're relatively easy to spot in other people. We all are nodding at that. However, identifying them in your own behavior is far more difficult. And generally, as these examples show, leaders who create an environment where subordinates are encouraged to challenge and support each other will create opportunities for people to develop their own leadership skills. Yes, Monty, Montgomery, and Rommel won battles and inspired troops, but in different ways, and in ways that we might consider effective, but inefficient today. Thank you very much.